For many people, their car is their pride and joy, but while most have to settle with a run-of-the-mill model, some are lucky enough to be able to afford something far more exclusive and expensive. You'd think anyone that had one of these would treat it with extreme care, but amazingly, there have been a number of instances where some of the most in-demand vehicles in the world have simply been left at the roadside and forgotten about entirely. With that in mind, let's take a look at the 15 most valuable abandoned vehicles ever. Number 15. Ferrari Enzo, $1.1 million. The Ferrari Enzo, named after the company's founder, is precisely what you'd expect from a modern Ferrari supercar. Incorporating technology developed for Formula One, it has a carbon fiber body, automated shift manual transmission, ceramic composite disc brakes, and plenty more cutting-edge features. It was also the first to be fitted with the F40 V12 engine, which gives an output of 651 horsepower, and this enables the car to reach an incredible top speed of 221 miles an hour, with the ability to go from 0 to 60 in just 3.1 seconds. It was in production between 2002 and 2004, during which time only 400 were made, which makes it all the more surprising that one was simply dumped and abandoned in a parking lot in Dubai. Images showed the vehicle covered in dust because it had been left there for so long, and it was eventually confiscated and auctioned off by police. You might be left wondering why someone would leave a vehicle in this way, and the answer is that it's not actually that uncommon in Dubai. There's a higher number of supercars per person than anywhere else in the world, and it's believed that the British owner of this one had racked up a large number of speeding fines. In the city, being in debt is a criminal offense, and many owners simply choose to leave their vehicles behind and flee instead of risking jail time. Number 14. 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona, $200,000. Dodge Chargers, no matter the model or year, will always have a special place in car enthusiasts' hearts. But the 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona is a particularly special version that's a cut above the rest. Only 503 of them were ever made, each fitted as standard with a 440 cubic inch Magnum engine, and on the Super Track Pack model, a 4-speed manual gearbox, a 4.1 Dana rear axle, and a 7-blade torque drive fan, power disc brakes, and a 26-inch high-performance radiator. As they were made more than 50 years ago, it's perhaps no surprise that only a few have been well-maintained and kept in perfect condition. But it was still a great shame to see this particular Charger left in such a state of disrepair. In a classic F8 dark green color, although strangely with a purple hood, it was found buried away in a garage and hadn't seen the light of day for several decades. Luckily though, it's not a lost cause, and the person who found it sent it straight to the auto shop to be brought back to life. Sure, there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done, the body and the interior, but once it's done, it could easily be worth several $100,000. Number 13. 1964 Jaguar EType, $150,000. Jaguar is one of the most prestigious car manufacturers in the world, and some of the models, particularly those that were made in the 60s and 70s, remain highly sought after. One of the most popular is the E-Type, a sports car that was produced between 1961 and 75 and was based on the companies that won the 24 Hours of Le Mans 3 years in a row from 1955. With a top speed of 150 miles an hour, the main standout feature, of course, is the way it looks. And Enzo Ferrari himself once called the E-Type the most beautiful car in the world. You'd have thought then that anyone who owned one would keep it immaculate, but recently the owners of a large country estate in Gloucestershire in England found one buried within a mound of shrubbery. Amazingly, it had been there for at least 30 years, and it hadn't coped with that treatment very well. It was found to be the 10th Series 1 E-Type 4.2 to have been made by Jaguar, and was purchased by a restoration company to bring it back to its prime. Unfortunately, they found the body was completely wrecked, and the only parts that were of any use were the running gear and rear suspension. After sourcing replacement parts for virtually everything else, the car was finally able to drive again, and was sold soon after for just over $150,000. Number 12. Koenigsegg Trevita. The Swedish car manufacturer Koenigsegg is known for its high-performance vehicles, and between 2006 and 2010 produced a model called the CCX. With a 4.7-liter twin supercharged engine, it had a power output of 806 horsepower, which gave the car an incredible top speed of more than 249 miles an hour. Only 29 of them were ever made, but in a further case of exclusivity, the company designed a limited edition called the Trevita, which means the three whites. The intent was to make 3 of them, which would each have a diamond weave carbon fiber finish, but it proved to be so difficult to make only 2 were completed. One of them ended up being owned by Floyd Mayweather, but the other was simply abandoned in a Swiss parking garage. Even the owners of the lot couldn't believe it had been left there like that, which at the time realized it had been abandoned, had already accumulated $1,000 worth of fines, and even more amazingly, the owner, once they tracked him down, didn't want to know about it. Apparently, he had a penchant for abandoning cars like this, and had already bought another supercar and abandoned that one too. Number 11. Bugatti Veyron, $1.5 million. The name Bugatti is synonymous with fast, luxurious cars that are a step above what other manufacturers are able to achieve, and the motoring world stood back in amazement in 2005 with the release of the Veyron. With a top speed of 253 miles an hour and a simply stunning aesthetic, it was described by motoring experts as one of the best modern cars to have ever been produced. And still, more than 15 years later, very few new models have managed to match it. Not everyone was so impressed, however, and the cost of maintaining them became too much of an obstacle for a Russian owner. In 2013, he had been involved in an accident with an Aston Martin that rear-ended his Veyron, and instead of sending it for repairs, he left it in a parking lot behind his dealership. The brutal Russian winters really put the Veyron through its paces and caused the paint to wear away and the bodywork beneath began to rust. The last images ever seen of it show it was far from being roadworthy, and the longer the 986 horsepower vehicle is left like this, the more expensive it'll be to one day repair it. Number 10. Maybach 57, $380,000. Maybach was a classic automotive manufacturing brand that had long gone out of business before Daimler AG revived the marquee in the early 2000s. The aim was to create a premium luxury design that could compete with RollsRoyce and Bentley, and by all accounts were successful with that quest. At the forefront of the new line of vehicles was the Maybach 57, which at a price of around $380,000 is fitted with a 5.5-liter twin-turbo V12 engine, with the ability to accelerate from 0 to 60 in just over 5 seconds. Of course, the interior is where the 57 truly comes into its own, with leather trim and virtually every feature that you could ever want. But it seems a French owner wasn't as impressed by their new car as the rest of the motoring world was. A Maybach 57 was found abandoned in a parking lot on the southern coast, where it had been for at least 4 years. Covered in a thick layer of dust, other users of the garage had covered it in messages, some of which weren't exactly complimentary to the owner, and someone else had taken it upon themselves to remove the luxury sedan's badge, presumably to add to their own ride. As far as anyone knows, this Maybach 57 is still to be claimed and remains in its parking spot, which has already been fully paid for. Number 9. Aston Martin DBS, $300,000. Aston Martin has produced a long line of stunning and incredibly fun cars over the decades, but if you ask any expert which model they'd most like to drive, they'll most likely say the DBS that was produced in the late 60s and early 1970s. Only 120 were made with a manual gearbox, and you may find it familiar thanks to its use by James Bond in the 1969 movie On Her Majesty's Secret Service. While most are accounted for either with wealthy owners or having been written off, the location of a few of them remains unknown. And in the summer of 2020, one was found in an unlikely place, an old barn in the town of Bridgnorth, Shropshire, in the UK. With a white gold interior and with just 60,000 miles on the clock, it clearly hadn't been on the road for at least 40 years. It was found when the owners of the estate died and his family were searching through his possessions, and they had no idea a stunning car like this would be there. It had seen better times, though, and was infested with moths and mice. But after contacting a classic car restoration company, it soon became clear that with a little work, the car could be restored to its former glory, and it was soon offered at auction for an incredible $300,000. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. Ferrari Dino 246 GT, $300,000. One of the most mysterious incidents involving a valuable abandoned car took place in January 1978 in Los Angeles. A group of children had been playing in the backyard of a home and were digging in the ground when they found something hard a couple of feet beneath the surface. Not sure what it might be, they called the authorities, who sent a team over to investigate. After carefully digging around the object, they were finally able to identify it. It was a Ferrari Dino 246 GT, a vehicle that's worth in the region of $300,000 in perfect condition. But how could such a car have found its way underground like this? Originally, it was reported at the time that the car had been stolen 4 years earlier and that the thieves had buried it until the time that it was safe to recover it. But in the investigation over the following few months, officers unearthed a more devious scheme. The car's owner, Rosendo Cruz, had worked with the thieves to commit insurance fraud, and the plan was that they'd destroy it. He collected the money, but they buried it instead, and then forgot where they had put it, so were never able to go back for it. Cruz was convicted for the fraud, and the vehicle was purchased from the insurance company by a new owner who was able to restore it to its original condition and still drives it to this day. Number 7. Lamborghini Mira, $483,000. Produced between 1966 and 1973, the Lamborghini Mira was the first mass-produced supercar that had a rear mid-engine two-seat layout. 764 of them were built by the Italian company, and it was for a number of years the flagship model. With a 3929cc V12 engine with a 5-speed manual transmission, it had a top speed of around 171 miles an hour and was able to accelerate from 0 to 60 in just 6.7 seconds. With its unmistakable eyelash headlights, it was the epitome of car design at the time, and one of them was given to the Greek rally driver Stamatis Kokatas to add to his collection. With so many high-performance vehicles at his disposal, very few of his cars were ever actually taken out on the road, and the Mira was simply left in a parking lot beneath the Hilton Hotel in Athens to collect dust for 42 years. It was only rediscovered in 2012, and amazingly had only suffered from minor cosmetic damage. The metallic brown color was still clear to see, the tan leather interior was still in fairly good condition, and it only took a small amount of work to restore it to its former greatness. With an estimated value of almost $500,000, it's now part of a private collection, and again, is rarely ever taken out on the roads. Number 6. Le Mans Blue Jaguar XJ220, $500,000. The two-seat Jaguar XJ220 was produced by the British manufacturer between 1992 and 1994, during which time they completed 282 of them. With a record top speed of 212.3 miles per hour, it was powered by a 3500cc twin-turbocharged Jaguar V6 engine and became the fastest and most expensive production car of its time. In many ways, it encapsulated what high-performance vehicles were about in the early 90s and still holds a special place in the memory of car enthusiasts. So it tugged at their heartstrings in 2010 when this image of a Le Mans Blue Jaguar XJ220 began circulating that had been taken out on a street in Qatar. From all accounts, the car hadn't been moved for a number of years, and it clearly had not been given the care and attention it had deserved, and had fallen into a pretty sorry state. The story behind it is just as mysterious, as records show it was perfect in every way a few years earlier when it was sold by a Jaguar dealer in Dubai. In the time since, it had ended up in Beirut, supposedly owned by a questionable character, before being sold on to Qatar. Probably the worst thing of all, though, is that despite all it's been through, it's still only got just under 600 miles on the clock. Number 5. 1967 Shelby Cobra 427, $2 million. The Shelby Cobra 427 is one of the most sought-after classic cars in the world. It was the pinnacle of what Ford was able to produce in the 1960s, and the combination of its performance along with its incredible aesthetic made automotive history, even if it did ultimately prove to be a financial failure for the company, which resulted in them ceasing manufacture in 1969. This, however, simply limited the numbers that were available, and collectors today have been known to pay as much as $2 million for one in pristine condition. You can imagine the surprise then when contractors began emptying an abandoned home and garage in North Carolina in 2017, when they found a 1967 Shelby Cobra 427, as well as a similarly rare 1966 Ferrari 275 GTB. According to the official story, a car enthusiast had purchased 5 of his favorite models, along with a new home, and parked them all in the garage in 1991, but for some reason never returned. They remained there for the following 26 years before the building was declared unsafe and was condemned, which is why workers were sent in to look for anything of value. The Cobra's aluminum body was largely undamaged, and there were no post-sale adaptations, meaning it was an original state as you could ever want. The only problem for restorers was the family of mice that had nested in the glove box, but this was a relatively easy thing to fix. What made this particular Cobra more valuable was that it was just one of 105 of them, that despite having a 427 badge, was actually fitted with a 428 cubic inch engine, a Thunderbird Police Interceptor V8. The reason this was done was likely due to the cost, with the 428 costing less than half the price of the 427 race-ready engine. Despite making this switch, however, there was an agreement at Ford that if any customers complained about the engine, it could be returned and replaced with the advertised 427 at no extra cost. Number 4. Ferrari F40, $450,000. Produced by the renowned Italian manufacturer between 1987 and 1992, only 1,315 Ferrari F40s were ever made. Retailing for $400,000, which is the equivalent of more than twice that today, it had a 2,900cc twin-turbocharged V8 engine with a top speed of 197 miles an hour. At the time, it was the fastest, most expensive, and most powerful vehicle on offer from Ferrari, and it was the last model to be approved by Enzo Ferrari himself. It wasn't exactly the most beautiful car ever designed, however, and there were mixed reactions when it first was revealed. But car enthusiasts soon came to love it, and it even featured as the main car in a number of video games at the time. Quite often, cars like these become trophies for unfavorable people around the world, like dictators and crime bosses. And that's how this one ended up being abandoned in an Iraqi desert. It had been owned by Uday Hussein, the son of Saddam Hussein, and he was killed by a U.S. airstrike in 2003. No one returned for the car in the confusion that followed, and it was left to rot in the sun for more than a decade after. Now being held in a private garage, it's in such a bad state that it's hardly financially viable to even attempt to restore it. Number 3. RollsRoyce Phantom Centurion, $350,000. When you think of premium luxury cars, one of the manufacturers that's bound to come to mind is Rolls-Royce. The company has been making top-end vehicles for more than a century, even though it's gone through several changes of ownership. And since 1925, there's almost always been a model on the market called the Rolls-Royce Phantom. Of course, the design has been upgraded numerous times over the years to incorporate the latest technologies and trends in the industry. But even that wasn't enough for a Russian owner who bought a Phantom 7 and had extensive modifications made to it, including the addition of a Centurion body kit to turn it into a one-of-a-kind Rolls-Royce Phantom Centurion. You'd think someone who had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars creating this customized vehicle would plan on actually using it, but images show that it ended up being abandoned alongside a railway track. Regularly covered in snow and with deflated tires, it was once apparently owned by a Las Vegas celebrity, but has certainly fallen from grace now. Number 2. Lamborghini Countach, $500,000. The Lamborghini Countach was one of the Italian company's best-selling models while it was produced between 1974 and 1990, and by the time they stopped making them, 1,983 had been sold. The shape of it was created by Italian design house Bertone and was one of the first to have the trademark Italian wedge shape with sharp angles all over the body. Powered by a Lamborghini V12 engine, it could reach a top speed of up to 185 miles per hour in the right hands, and even acted as the safety car in the Formula One races at Monaco between 1980 and 83 because of its speed and handling around the tight corners of the circuit. For its 25th anniversary, a few more were made for posterity's sake, and it was one of these that was recently seen languishing in exile in a parking garage in Tokyo. With a tire clearly missing and some bricks holding it up, this car clearly hadn't been driven for a long time, and the owner had most likely moved on to brighter and shinier things. Number 1. Bugatti Type 57S, $10 million. Classic car designs can command huge sums of money, and while there's very little demand for models from the 1930s, there's one that continues to interest collectors, the Bugatti Type 57S. With only 17 ever made, 15 of which are known to still exist, the vehicles made in 1937 were described as being the ultimate road-going sports car from the golden era of the 1930s. Fitted with a 3.3-liter 8-cylinder engine, the Type 57S has a top speed of 130 miles an hour and can accelerate from 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. Beyond the specs, however, what's undeniable is that it's a stunning-looking car and an important part of automotive history. Amazingly, a long-forgotten Bugatti Type 57S was found in 2009 when relatives began clearing out the possessions of their hoarder uncle. The car was found in the garage with a tax disc that had expired in 1960, and according to experts, around 99% of its original components were still present and in working order. All it needed was a little restoration, and it was ready to be put up for auction, with a guide price of up to $10 million. Watch our Vehicles playlist for more top 15 videos about amazing vehicles. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best vehicle videos.